Today I'm going to give a brief overview of the book of Sitra Achra, a grimoire of the dragons of the other side, by Achra publications. This is a rare and often much sought after book that is, it's very interesting, as most of these books tend to be. And it is not something for casual reading. It is not something that you would pick up to relax. It is work just to read most of the paragraphs. It is a very intense, somewhat repetitive work that is extremely detailed, and that is probably a good reason as to why people seek out this text. Of course, a lot of the books that are made by this publisher are very quickly discontinued and hard to come by after a certain period. So to kind of give you an idea, this focuses a lot on the Qliphoth, the Tree of Life, in other words. You've got, as a brief summary of that, let me see if I can actually find the diagram, and I probably should have done this first. But essentially, oh, there it is. Coming back up here. Essentially, you have, it's a representation, again, in layman's terms, of creation. This is the Tree of Death. The Tree of Life is the inversion of this, where essentially you would say God is at top, you have 7 layers, and then the closer you get to the bottom, the more carnal, and eventually you get to mankind. This is the Tree of Death, obviously the inversion, and of course down here would be the supreme evil, and then these branches here go up to the base where it would meet the Tree of Life. Again, very basic terms. I'm familiar with the Qliphoth and the ideas and the concepts of it, but I haven't spent a whole lot of time studying it. So, if you're familiar with this book, it's been a baptism by fire, in a way. It goes through and talks about the Qliphoth of the Tree of Death. It talks about essentially the different sigils and formulae that you would recommend, that they claim you can use for different demons and spirits. And it's a lot of variation on that, actually. This is, of course, Samael's formula, and let's see. Essentially, once you get through those, then you have more sigils and seals and keys, and all the demon princes have those. And then you get more sigils and seals. And really, the first 150 pages or so are explanations, 2 or 3 pages explaining what the particular seals are used for, and then it gets into variations, and then it does that again for 3 or 4 chapters. Then it talks about the different letters of the other side, their prescribed powers, and then you get into some more sigils and more seals, and you can tell probably by my speech that it's very in-depth. It's very tiring, to be honest. Again, this isn't something you pick up and work. This is essentially a textbook. This isn't like history or theory. This is hardcore practice. Again, it ties into the zodiac. Here's a good example of some of the names, the signs, the times, elements, planetary values. And again, there's the diagram, and it does get into a little bit later on. I think it's actually about halfway or so. But it doesn't take too long to read a couple paragraphs about a sigil, especially when you've done it 3 or 4 times by this point. It does get into some of the tools that somebody would use for the rituals after it introduces all those sigils. And then there's a ritual to open up the 7 gates. And then after this point, it gets into some of the chants that people might use, another ritual, and then it gets into some of the geometry aspect of it. Practical applications of the stars of the 11, more breakdown of the alphabet and the names, reflective points of the 11 rulers, and then again it gets into more, pretty much the last half of the book, which is I guess what I'm about to get into, is more so about practice in depth as opposed to just sigil, sigil, key, key, sigil, 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 key, meaning geometry, letters, which I'm excited about. I want to see this part here that I'm kind of going through. It gives you some ingredients as well for how to make your own incense. Then it gets into some of the packs that you can make. This is more the hands-on side of it after you've again gone through all those sigils. So, you know, if you were to kind of go through and, again, this is the kind of the final notes here, but if you were to go through this book, and again, this is kind of like a complete work in of itself, but if you were to go through and essentially, I don't know, maybe pick out one of these demonic princes, let's say, pick out number 5, and look at his sigil, look at his explanation, look at his geometry, look at the pact. You know, that book would probably be 20 or 30 pages. It would be a fraction of the size of this book. But this is dragons of the other side. So each one of these heads here represents one of the dragons and their full system, you know, to work with them, if you want to use that terminology. Again, for me, this is all academic, so maybe that's why some of this is kind of lost on me. But I do think it's interesting. If you ever get a chance to look at it or borrow it from somebody for a few days, definitely do so. If it picks up a lot in the second half, this will probably be one of my favorite books. Right now, I am glad to have it, but there are probably about maybe 10 other books that I've been more impressed with that were a lot less. So thanks for watching, and feel free to leave any comments or questions below.